ladies.
All right.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody. I know this is the last session, and I have been a speaker here. This, I think, is my third Cyber Defense Summit. So the good news is I'm back. The bad news is you had to wait till the end of the day to see all of us. So with that, we're going to do a quick introduction of the team that we have up here. This is big slides, too. So first off, I'm Karen Kokoda. I'm part of FireEye's strategic partnership team. I manage all of our cyber risk partners. And cyber risk partners are insurance partners like Beasley, law firm partners like Mullen Coughlin, and they work very well with our team because they complement all the things that we do here at FireEye, whether it's Mandiant services or FireEye products. And so we have a really amazing group of women that are on the stage with me that are part of the FireEye team, and they all have different expertise. So Dasha's part of the Mandiant team, and we also have Elizabeth, who's part of our email threat prevention platform team, and we also have Maria, who was both Mandiant and is now threat intelligence. So real quick, I'm going to let everybody start off with their own introduction. We'll start with Dasha first.
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess evening. Thank you all for being here. I know that we're the last panel, so appreciate the attendance. My name is Dasha Tarasenko. I am a senior consultant with Mandiant. My background is in IR and malware analysis. I'm also a veteran of the Office 365 business email compromise, case approach. Yeah, that's about it.
Sure, Jennifer.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Coughlin. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Mullen Coughlin. We are a team of almost 30 attorneys that do nothing but counsel organizations in investigating and responding to potential or confirmed data privacy events, defending organizations in any type of third-party regulatory or litigation claim, and also assisting organizations in pre-breach services, consultation services to prepare for an event.
My name is Maria Naboa. I'm previously from the computer forensics and IR world, malware analysis, and Intel analyst for a while before going to Mandiant and doing SOC assessments and crisis simulation, and now get to work under technical marketing for services and intelligence.
I'm Lauren Winchester. I'm a privacy breach response services manager at Beasley, which is a cyber liability insurer. And I'm also a privacy attorney. And our team has handled over 10,000 incidents. We're a project management resource that comes along with our policies. And we assist our policyholders in responding to all sorts of incidents, but particularly email compromises of late.
My name is Elizabeth Flamini. I'm with FireEye. I work in the product marketing organization, and I focus on email security. And that includes both our cloud edition as well as our on-premises email security offering at FireEye.
Great, thank you. So first off, before we get started, because obviously impersonation attacks and phishing attacks are the #1 threat vector. Over 90% of the breaches that we investigate here at Mandiant start with these type of attacks. But I have a joke for you first. What's the CISO's least favorite summer activity? Fishing. Thank you, Darren. And by the way, because you all stuck around for the last session, drinks on me. We have a huge cocktail party after, so I hope you stay for the whole thing. So why did we put this panel together? And this panel is a little different than some of the other ones that you've seen that have talked about email threats, phishing attacks, and some of the concerns around that. I think first off, this really focuses on how we collaboratively work on a problem that we've already identified. And we do it not just with FireEye and Mandiant people, but we include insurance partners like Beasley, law firm experts like Jennifer from Mullen Coughlin, to weigh in and give us their perspective and also what they're seeing as far as how advanced these attacks are and how much they cost. I think that's another really big aspect here. So first off, I want to make sure everybody is aware that the kind of email compromises that we are seeing have morphed and have evolved incredibly. And we're going to talk about that. We really see the cost of these breaches not just focused on forensic investigation and legal costs, but things like notifications. And I know there's many more that you bring up, Lauren, that Beasley actually covers if you have a claim with Beasley, so we'll talk about that. But first off, I want to ask the panel, since we've seen these massive increases in email compromises, what are the primary email security challenges that most businesses face, and what can we do to help them?
I guess, who wants to take that one?
Do you want to talk about some of the things you've seen from Beasley?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the primary, challenges that we're seeing right now, it's been being able to prevent wide-scale phishing compromises with kind of a refusal to roll out multi-factor authentication. So a lot of our insureds have the capability to roll out multi-factor authentication and really are deterred from doing so with perceived headache from what that rollout would look like, training users, and just difficulties that they see within their user base in terms of adopting a new approach. But by and large, a lot of the compromises that we're dealing with wouldn't have occurred if they had rolled out multi-factor authentication. So, that's something that I've been talking to a lot of our insureds about doing, especially once they've had a large-scale phishing attack, trying to encourage them to up their timetable to roll that out. But really, here what I wanted to point out to you, so this is Beasley data from our breach response services team. And we've really seen a massive increase in email compromise incidents. And when I say email compromise incidents, I'm removing email compromise as just like phishing as a cause of an incident, because phishing is behind almost like 90% of our incidents probably. So this is really where you've got credentials that are taken and an attacker is coming back into an inbox and leveraging that inbox in a number of different ways. And so that specific type of attack has just been on the rise over the past year. And in 2018, I just reran the numbers through the end of Q3, and we're well over 550 at this point. So literally multiple times a day, we're getting email compromises coming into our claims inbox. And the other thing to note is we're seeing it across industries. So certainly financial institutions and healthcare institutions are notifying us of these compromises, but we see it with every single type of policyholder. The attackers are not necessarily going after one specific industry more than another. Everybody's getting hit with email compromise right now. But in terms of how damning it can be to an organization, obviously if you're in an industry where you have a lot of sensitive personal information in your inboxes, then there's a lot more involved in the response, and the costs can be a lot higher. And so, that's pretty much what we've been seeing. But I know, Jen, you've been seeing a ton of email compromise as well this year. Maybe you can weigh in.
Yeah, so we see on average between 30 and 40 new events every week coming into our office. And I would say 50%, if not more, are business email compromises. And what we're seeing as being primary issues for organizations, the lack of multi-factor authentication, the lack of employee training regarding security and what a phishing attack may look like and what you should do if you receive a suspicious email. The lack of enforcement of information security policies. So what policies does the organization have regarding the storing of certain data in their email account? And then the lack of understanding of what's really in there. The amount of protected information pursuant to state law and federal law and contract that we find in people's email accounts, unsecured and not really needed, is just mind-blowing and very expensive for the organization when you have to conclude that that information may have been accessed or acquired without authorization and notice is due as a result of the event.
So I've got a question for you, Dasha. We've identified that there's a potentially compromised mailbox or email account. What do you recommend that companies should do when they've identified that sort of problem?
So I can tell you guys what not to do. What you shouldn't do is basically remove all traces of the potentially compromised mailbox or any evidence. So for example, removing forwarding rules without taking a screenshot of them at the very least. That's one of the key things that we see happening most often. You wanted to check and make sure that your audit logging is enabled, which a lot of companies don't actually have before they find out they've been breached. Essentially, you don't want to undermine the subsequent forensic investigation that's going to have to happen. A lot of times what we'll see is IT personnel trying to mitigate the fallout by just keeping or sweeping things under the rug. That doesn't ever really work out in their benefit. So, make sure that you provide or you establish a very open policy, especially with your IT team, in terms of making them feel comfortable to come forward and say, I've been seeing some interesting stuff or some potentially wonky stuff in like Azure, for example, and I would like to address it, because a lot of times folks will get nervous about coming forward.
Thank you. So based on what we've seen in some of the email threats and the compromises, Maria, what do we expect to see in the future? Because I know we've got incredible amounts of threat intelligence, and we've actually studied some particular groups like Fin7 that have helped with these targeted attacks and really start with those phishing campaigns.
Absolutely. Excuse me. I think starting around 2015, we started responding to incidents where there was just increasing amounts of social engineering prowess used by the attackers. What they're doing is either initiating contact via a web form and forcing the victim to contact them first, or they are going and calling, making a complaint, saying that they're going to follow up with an email, and then after sending the email, they will then follow up with another call to ensure that they received it. And many of times they're targeting specific people within the organization, such as a manager that they might contact in a at a hotel and say, we have specific dietary restrictions for this event. It's very important that we go over these. They're using Photoshop. They're using techniques that just haven't been seen before. So we expect to see more creativity, but we also expect to see more attempts at exploiting multi-factor authentication, which we're already seeing through mobile devices.
We often say that email is the tip of the spear for cyber attacks. Both spear phishing and socially engineered tactics have become more crafty, more targeted, and obviously way more advanced. So what can we as a team do to help our customers, and how have we seen this developed? And Elizabeth, if you could talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use here at FireEye to help with that.
Sure. So as we were talking, or as Jen was talking about seeing more prevalence of business email compromise type attacks, we've heard from organizations that they're just resigned to not being able to detect or prevent these types of attacks from occurring. We did an acquisition of a company called the Email Laundry last year, and they had been working on the development of a robust tool set to enable detection of business email compromise or impersonation type attacks. And that tool set has been incorporated into our email security offering, our cloud edition offering specifically. And the combination of these tools leads to coming up with a score, essentially, for determining whether the sender of the message is who they claim to be. So there's a number of ways to detect it. We're able to detect spoofing of the friendly display name, for example. About 70% of email is now read on a mobile device, and the only thing that you actually see is the friendly name display, because the real estate that's available on a mobile device is so limited. So that's an area where we have seen a lot of spoofing and a lot of compromises coming in that way. So we do have a way of being able to detect that. A more recent technique that attackers have started to use is where you would expect to see the friendly name. They are now placing an email address because it's unexpected to see an email address there. We were actually anticipating that, we were prepared for that, and now we're starting to see it. So we do have a number of tools that enable our email security offering to be able to detect these increasingly prevalent types of impersonation attacks.
So I do have one, I guess, like anecdotal little story in terms of one of the cases that I worked, and it's in line with spoofing. So essentially, it was a large shipping manufacturing company, and it was actually only a couple, I think 2 or 3 mailboxes that were compromised, and they weren't high-level people. Unfortunately, one of the individuals who was compromised, or whose credentials was compromised, was an accounting person. They weren't, the person who signs off on the accounts or any changes, but she was on the emails. So what we saw the attacker doing was they reviewed her mailbox, and they identified threads with customers, and subsequently spoofed the emails from the individuals who would approve any sort of like changes to bank account information. And by doing that, they replied all to one of the threads that was in her mailbox from this spoofed or with this spoofed email account, and subsequently got, I think it was like $1.2 million transferred to a Hong Kong bank. And then, then came the question, like, where did the money go? Who did this? So it's an example of, multiple vectors being used. So it's not just about, compromising an inbox. Like your email can still be spoofed after a particular box has been compromised, and the damage can be done that way.
And you bring up a really good point, Dasha, because we all know that even though they spoof your email or they have a phishing attack, the fact that they're able to move laterally in your organization and get to bank account information and transfer money out of your company, how do you financially recover from things like that? So Lauren, if you could talk a little bit about some of the cyber insurance value, the kind of specific things that Beasley offers to customers, and how your team works with customers when they have a problem like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think taking a step back to a less targeted attack and maybe a more widespread phishing campaign that hits your company. Why do we care about that? Well, obviously, there's the chance that they're going to be able to move laterally, get access to other things. Once they compromise an email inbox, they're going to try and get at users within the organization who are able to effect a wire transfer. They'll go and try and do that. They will also potentially go into other platforms like your HR self-service payroll platform, redirect payroll, that's financial loss. But then we also really do care about the substance of the compromised email account, particularly in industries like healthcare or financial institutions, where no matter how good your email practices might be, we're always going to be able to find some protected health information or personally identifiable information in those mailboxes, depending on user roles. And so those investigations, the lost funds aside, and we can talk about that, there's potential coverages for that under crime policies or add-ons that they're now doing to cyber policies. But what's truly expensive on top of the lost funds is that investigation and response costs that you're going to incur. And so let's take, for instance, a very common scenario I'm seeing right now. Large healthcare organization, 50 email inboxes compromised. Most of the users we would know to have PHI, we would believe would have PHI and then protected health information. So what we're going to need to do there is bring in legal and forensics, do an investigation. Typically, we're not going to have enough logging or granularity in the logs to rule out a compromise of that inbox. Particularly on Office 365, the default settings have not been nearly robust enough to do anything with. And we can try and access additional logging in other ways that might be able to narrow down the actual emails that were accessed by the attacker. But the utility of those and whether or not we can get access to them is always a potential question. And there's also a chance that the logging will show that the attacker actually synced the mailbox. And so when you're faced with the possibility that the attackers sync the mailbox on their end and could at any point down the line go back through and comb through all the data within the mailbox, it's very hard for an attorney to justify not giving notice to potentially affected individuals in that situation, knowing an attacker has the data. So that turns into, beyond the forensics costs, a very costly review of the inboxes. You can do programmatic searches to try and find the sensitive data, but that ultimately will have hits that need to be reviewed by humans in order to put together an actual list of affected individuals, what data has been impacted for each of them, and then typically that's going to be a lot of document reviewers. And it has to go back to the organization to even find these addresses, because unfortunately, in the way that the data is sitting within inboxes, it's rarely a spreadsheet that's very helpful with current addresses for each person. So that's all very time-consuming, very costly. Cyber insurance is a big component of that response. As if an organization has insurance, we're able to potentially cover the costs of that legal, forensics, document review, mailing to affected individuals, call centers, credit monitoring if appropriate. And these costs can really range. So it can be anywhere from like $100,000 costs, $500,000 or $50,000 costs on low end to investigate these, all the way up to we've had multi-million-dollar claims. So the time in there, then needing to notify regulators, the potential for regulatory fines and penalties, potential for class actions. We're really just at the beginning of some of these truly large email compromises and what the downstream impacts are going to be.
And I know when we first have an incident like that, they call Beasley, a customer calls Beasley, their hair's on fire, they're not sure what to do. Lauren's team helps start the process. Then they hand it off to somebody like Jennifer, who's the breach coach. So Jennifer, maybe you can talk through some of the things that you have to bring up to the clients as they're trying to figure out what's happened and who do I go to help me and what are the next steps? Are there regulatory concerns? Are there compliance issues at hand?
Sure. So legally, why do you care if somebody's in one of your employees' email accounts? Because under certain laws, you may have an obligation to tell individuals whose information may have been viewed by the attacker or taken by the attacker. And Lauren referenced syncing of email accounts. That means the entire content of the email account has been downloaded by the attacker. And like she said, I can't reasonably conclude that that information isn't potentially at risk as a result of the incident because we know it's in the attacker's hands. So legally, we are concerned about what data is in the email account and to whom that data relates to determine if there's any type of reporting obligation out to those individuals, regulators, consumer reporting agencies, and other third parties. And there may be contractual issues as well. So under state law, social security number is protected. Under a contract, you may have agreed to keep any information you receive from an individual or a third party as confidential. So you may have reporting obligations there as well, exposing you to potential litigation, regulatory claims as well. So when we become involved, we work with Dasha and her team to go through the forensic investigation, to answer the who, what, when, where, how, and possibly why, but very rarely why. But whose email accounts were compromised? Can we determine who the attacker is? What information was viewed? For how long was the attacker in there? And with all of those answers, we are able to determine what the organization has to do and assist them in fulfilling their legal obligations, while also working with Lauren's team to make sure we're working within the confines of the policy, but we are not coverage attorneys, so that the out-of-pocket exposure for the organization is minimal at best.
It'd be so much easier if they just had our email threat prevention platform to go through all that. So with that, I know, Dasha, many times you work with clients before they have an incident. Can you talk a little bit about some of the risk assessments that Mandiant can provide and the visibility that we can help our clients with so that they can actually put the right solutions in place and not go through these kind of issues?
Sure. I mean, specifically, I would say one thing that I've seen most often is, a client will have, for example, all the logs enabled, and they will have all of the additional functionalities within their email platform enabled, but nobody's monitoring it. Or, for example, they'll have an out-of-the-box tool for endpoint monitoring, and nobody's actually looking at any of the alerts that are coming through or coming in. And that's kind of the issue that we see most often. It's like they have the technology, but they're not actually using the technology to any capacity whatsoever. So someone like Mandiant or any other consulting firm, but preferably Mandiant, would come in and actually help you and your IT team, I guess, understand what your technology has the capacity of doing, then subsequently how to respond to any potential issues, because the reality is, something's going to happen. It's highly, well, it's almost impossible for you to be able to just skate through without having any sort of, I guess, incident occur, whether, small or large. So I think and we can do that for a client as small as a couple of people, or, an IT team as small as a couple of people, to, federal governments or regional governments, so SOCs, things of that nature.
Great. And I just want to bring up that Mandiant also puts incident response retainers in place so we can very quickly respond to these sort of issues. We also provide a lot of visibility before you have an incident, where we put your team through things like tabletop exercises. And you can do these in conjunction with outside legal counsel to help you. And you can also do this as you're placing your insurance or you're going to renew. And then you can actually demonstrate how you've improved your security posture in different ways. So I know we have a lot of threat intelligence specific to these targeted attacks, and I want to make sure we take a few minutes to talk about that, because it's impacted customers of every size. And I know we put together some stats on this, so I want to let both Maria and Elizabeth talk a little bit about how we've seen the threats evolve and the changes and what these numbers mean.
Yeah, so, as we've been talking about, email is the most pervasive means of communication. And, the numbers support this. So 281 billion emails are sent and received every day. And we recently, based on FireEye data, we looked at about 500 million emails, and based on our data, we found that only 32% of the messages that are sent arrive clean, or in other words, end up being delivered to an email box. So that means that the other, 68% or so, are either spam or contain something about them that is malicious. So only 32% are making their way to an inbox. And what I find particularly stunning as a stat, the $12.5 billion represents the amount of financial loss that the FBI has tracked, and that goes back to October of 2013, I believe it is. So over a 3-year period, they tracked a cumulative financial loss of $5.3 billion associated with business email compromise that was related to either businesses or individuals that conduct wire transfer payments. So 5.3 billion after the first 3 years of the tracking. And then 18 months later, they reported that that number, again cumulative, had increased to 12.5 billion in financial loss. So that's a 135% increase in financial loss associated with these types of attacks in half the amount of time. So I think that increase is really stunning, and it makes me wonder if we'll see more than 100% increase in, say, half that amount of time or over the next 9 months. The typical cost associated with a spear phishing attack is 1.6 million, but as we've been hearing from Lauren as well as from Jen, I suspect that that number is actually much higher once you take into consideration all the additional costs that organizations incur when in fact they are the victim of a cyber breach. And we've touched a little bit upon, the importance of intelligence, and one of the real differentiators that FireEye has is the amount of intelligence that we have, and that feeding into our technology. And the most recent M-Trends report, which is a FireEye report, reported that it takes about 101 days before a breach is actually discovered within an organization. So with good intelligence, that amount of time can actually be reduced by quite a bit. And that relates to knowing who the possible attackers are that are going after organizations that are in your same industry. So this is why email is the #1 cyber attack vector. So it's really no wonder.
And I frequently get questions about how our intelligence feeds into our products and how our product telemetry feeds back into our intelligence. And I think one of the great parts about being part of FireEye is that we have this unique innovation cycle. And we have examples of where we have used our dynamic threat intelligence from our products. So global sensors, we're detecting campaigns as they're happening. Our threat intelligence customers are able to then receive this intelligence rather quickly, saying, we're seeing a trend here happening, attacking this region, this industry, here's what you should do about it. We're able to also do research from our threat intelligence side and provide detections that go through our FireEye labs that then make it as email detections in our email security product. So recently, ThreatKit, we were able to test, do analysis, send it to labs. They were able to create 2 detections, which are now part of email security.
I think it's so interesting to think about how FireEye uses our email security products and what kind of campaign intelligence we have coming up. And are there certain threat groups that we've seen and information that's already being exchanged with the...
We are, every day, our dynamic threat intelligence is coming in, and we are on a daily basis sometimes, if not weekly, putting out threat activity alerts to our customers. This is us seeing activity on the underground. This is us seeing activity coming in from sensors. We're backing it up with context. A lot of attacks recently in Southeastern Asia against telecom companies with Duobeam is a recent example. But this is something that APT groups, Fin groups, whether it's ideological motives, financial motives, we're just seeing this everywhere, and it's not something that's stopping anytime soon. And as we see this evolution of trying to bypass multi-factor authentication, we can just continue to see an uptick in this activity.
And I think it really, from the threat intelligence side, it really helps cater or focus companies, security team on a particular, issue or vector. So a lot of times what we'll see out in the wild is, a company's like, oh, I'm a healthcare provider, or, I deal with hospitals, I'm a hospital lead. And they're like, I've been doing, or we did a tabletop exercise, not a tabletop, a demonstration of, how a doctor would be able to identify that, a particular medical device like an EKG machine or, something with a screen has been hijacked by, this, malicious individual. And it's like, well, that's not what you should be focusing on. Like the odds of somebody, hijacking one of your patients, like cardiac, what do you call them? The pacemakers is just very slim. I mean, however, what your real issue is and what people are going after, for example, would be your lobby computers that are just unlocked or have, just passwords that are basic. So, it kind of runs the gamut of, with the threat intel, you get both, the high level, or rather, very, very specific and targeted groups that are going after your particular industry, as well as just basic, focusing directions, which I think is very useful.
I want to leave some time for questions today, but I also want to bring up that we have a great tool here at FireEye that you can actually do a quick scan in your system to see if you have any, I'll call it anomalies going on in your email platform right now that you should be aware of. So if you haven't already seen our Fireproof product, super easy to put into your environment. Do a quick analysis, and I think probably Elizabeth can describe it a little bit better than I can.
Sure. So Fireproof is an email threat analysis. It's actually not a product, but it does. We have internal research that shows that FireEye email security detects 25% more advanced threats than Office 365, even with their advanced threat protection. And that's actually true for anything that's in the email security stack, but typically in Office 365 environments. So what this particular analysis does is that it fetches your email, it's delivered email, and then we put it through our email security solution. We do an analysis for any emails that are malicious, and we provide a summary of what was found by the analysis. And then an SE from FireEye will follow up to go over the details of the malicious emails that were found. And there's no interference or interruption to your email traffic. This is done, it pulls emails that have already been delivered, and so it will actually provide this analysis based on whatever you happen to have in your email security stack along with your Office 365 deployment. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of this analysis that we now have available. So you don't have to take our word in terms of, our research in terms of we actually detect 25% more than Office 365 with advanced threat protection, but you can see for yourself in your own environment by taking advantage of this analysis, which we've just made available in conjunction with the summit today.
And it doesn't cost anything to set up, so it's free to actually go through the analysis and get the detailed information. So with that, I want to open it up to the audience to see if you have any questions.
Great, yeah, so if anybody has any questions, please make your way to the middle of the aisles where there's some microphones. I'll go ahead and start off with one, which is, do we often see folks or attackers compromise an organization, use that compromised account to then attack another organization so it looks more legitimate? And do we have any examples of that or any anecdotes around that? I guess probably more for Dasha and Maria.
Like literally all the time. So in terms of just, that's like attacker 101. So in terms of, the African prince that's but used to email you guys being like, oh, I've got $50 million. If only you paid the taxes, I guarantee you, like the 50% of my $50 million. That doesn't really happen anymore. What we're seeing is significantly more targeted, and you also don't get like email blasts that just go to the entire mailbox. So an attacker will actually review, the communications that you have that you see in an inbox and see like, what additional connections you can make to other corporations. So I think with business emails or business email compromises, more often than not, folks are targeting like other businesses that are interacting with that mailbox. Sometimes we get Gmails, but it's usually corporate to corporate because that's where the money's at.
And I think it's really that exploitation of human trust. It is going to continue. We continuously see it, APT groups, fin groups, as I mentioned. But if they find their way into an account where they can do analysis and pivot off or be a trusted sender, then why not send an email to another organization? And that is something that we frequently see a report on.
From our perspective, sometimes we see them not trying to gain access to another organization's email account, but they'll get into one organization's email account, find an invoice, doctor it, send it to the client from that email account saying, hey, our wiring instructions changed, here they are. So then the other organization pays money to the fraudster, not realizing the organization paid the fraudster, and then the organization owed the money, follows up with the one that paid the fraudster and said, where's my money? Now you have the organization with the compromised email account out X million of dollars, and the organization that paid the fraudster out X million of dollars.
Who's responsible for that loss, by the way?
I hope they both have cyber insurance.
Excellent question. So
They figured
that
it out.
is not clearly established legally. There's an argument that can be made that the organization that paid the money to the fraudster is still due to pay the proper organization, and there's an argument that can be made that the organization with the compromised email account was negligent in allowing access to the email account and the invoice to be doctored.
So very much so TBD on that.
Yes.
There will be many more lawsuits on it.
Yes.
You have to join us for cocktails to hear more because we have a few more questions. So you're up.
Go ahead.
Check, check. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies, for your presentation. It's very clear that FireEye's email security solution helps prevent these types of attacks and is an industry leader in email security. But I wanted to get through your guys' experiences, if you could share some best practices on how we as humans, being the most vulnerable, can improve. When we're going through our day-to-day emails, whether it's our corporate email or our personal emails, what should we be looking for? And then in addition, kids being having access to the internet and all of these mobile devices and such. What are some ways that maybe you guys are teaching your kids to be cautious of suspicious emails, and overall, how can we improve with this being very clear that this is a top attack vector? So it's nothing new. It's not changing. It's very well known. So if you guys could share your experiences and thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So one thing that I've noticed with our insureds, because we've been trying to reach out on a more risk management basis as well, it's been key to have more and more employee training. And I know, from a personal standpoint, hopefully whatever company you're working with has that training in place as well. But it needs to be repeated, and it needs to be throughout the course of the year. What I've seen is a lot of companies are hiring, other companies are doing it in-house to do phishing of their employees. And if you click on the link or the attachment, you're sent to a website that does training to say you just got phished. And that also sends metrics back to the company to understand who's been clicking, how many, and to do additional training with those employees. And then a lot of organizations have started putting in red when you're replying to an email that's outside the organization. It'll alert you in red that that's what's occurring, to try and again highlight for the user that this is going outside the organization. And then really just slowing down. We're all on our phones. This is more for your personal email. You're on your phone constantly. You're very busy. You're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of emails a day. Slowing down, being more suspicious of what you're clicking on will really go miles in terms of your own personal security.
Yeah, I agree. On the personal security part, if I don't recognize the person and I hadn't sent them something, I wait until I can look at it on a PC to ensure it really isn't something problematic.
And pick up the phone. I mean, a lot of this can be resolved by picking up the phone. If you receive a suspicious email, if somebody receives an email from me saying, "Thank to you very much," that's not how I talk in email. And I would hope somebody would pick up the phone and say, "Jen, did you ask me to wire this money to you?" Right. Pick up the phone. And password hygiene.
Great excuse to talk to Jen Coughlin after this.
I always answer.
That's the password hygiene. Also, if you've got Gmail for your personal email, very easy to turn on two-factor. No reason why you shouldn't do that. It literally takes 2 minutes to implement, and that will protect you.
Yep.
And then don't enter your credentials on a site you're not familiar with. Question every time you put in a username and password why you're doing it, and if it's something that you intended.
And anything financial two-way authentication, especially banking.
Great, thank you for the question. We are coming up here at the end. We'll take one more question though. Vasu?
I think everybody wants to go home.
Hi, yes. You indicated that many institutions and organizations are not or are slow to implement two-factor authentication, and I was wondering about the cyber insurance and whether that was going to become a requirement in the future.
I wish it could be. I don't think it's marketable. So, yeah, I think just from a realistic perspective, we're obviously out there to sell policies. It's not something that carriers are requiring right now. Would it make you a much, much better risk? Yes. Is there some considerations that should go into underwriting if you do have multi-factor authentication implemented on your emails, and if you have other types of security controls? Yes. So I think the lesson there for organizations is if you have rolled that out, or if you're in a position to do so, you should be working with your broker to highlight that for underwriters to make yourself positioned as looking as a better risk and trying to get lower premium, probably.
We'll stay for you, Vasu. Go ahead.
Vasu, please.
No, I won't ask a question, but I will do a shout out. So first of all, massive shout out. These are our women leaders, and this is the first only women cybersecurity month. So give it up for them. Give it up for them.